Where did you grow up?
Albany, New York, 41 Loynridge Avenue. If anybody could imagine 1940s, it was just an amazing time, I think, for kids to grow up, because you really didn't have to worry about anybody. There was an empty field, a whole block that hadn't been developed. And it was right 2 doors from my house it started. So we could go over there and build forts and dig trenches, and our games were cowboys and Indians, you know, bow and arrow and cowboy hats and make-believe, shoot 'em and all that stuff. And it was an incredible period of time. The winters were long. It got dark at 4:30 and it was so cold up there. I had no brothers and sisters, so I had to use my own imagination a lot and cob stuff together to play with, and I got involved with making clay, modeling clay. And then my friend Jack Miner, he got interested in it, and so we would play together. At my house, we had the Cowboys and Indians. His basement was knights in shining armor. We'd take the clay and we'd model the figures, and then we would cut armor out of tin cans, and we had castles. So the other thing I was doing back then was I was very involved with the Cub Scouts and then the Boy Scouts. We learned to build our backpacks, you know, the frame ourselves, and we'd go off and we'd camp even in Albany in the mountains in April. Snow would be deep. So that was great for the outdoors part. My mother and father and little Eddie, we would go out and spend time on the farm, a very, very ramshackle farm. I know I had my first rifle when I was 11. Somehow they trusted me, and I'd go off with the rifle and I would hunt woodchucks. Syracuse had a packaging program dedicated to graphic design. I didn't want to be in advertising. There was nothing permanent about it in my mind. Whatever you did, like if you did an ad, it would be there 1 month and it would be gone. And I just liked the idea of designing something that I could hold and see and that would have a life. Shelf life, it turned out. My freshman year at Syracuse, I went into class and I saw my competition in class. It was enough to make me want to just pack up my little tush and head back to Albany and hide under my mother's bed because these people were so good. And they had come, many of them had come from the High School of Art and Design in Manhattan. I really had to haul. I got really lucky because the professor, Dr. Peter Peening, had come from Manhattan, and he retired and he went to Syracuse. He's the guy that designed a 3-ring sign for Ballantine beer back in the day. And so he was my instructor, and that worked out great because, again, you know, I don't want to say he took me under his wing, but he certainly was very responsible for encouraging me to go on. By the time I graduated, I had caught up and more than caught up with all these other people. I had no notions that I was a rocket scientist, a screaming talent or anything. I just knew it was going to be hard. But I also knew I had military service before I could start my career. So I was faced with 2 years of military duty ahead of me. So my assignment was to Sandia Base, New Mexico. Showed up as a green second lieutenant, and it was an incredible place. It was the Atomic Weapon Training Group. It was all underground. It was all top secret. It was an incredible, incredible time. So I left the military, drove back to Manhattan in my '57 Ford. My portfolio was like this big, by this big, by that wide, with metal edges, corners, weighed a freaking ton. And you wore a suit, for sure. And I would open that door to go my interviews, and the traffic was like racing by, and it was hot, dirty. The city was filthy dirty. I'd step out into that sun with that big portfolio, and I'd wilt instantly. And the interviews went great. Right away, I had 2 offers, and again, this was pivotal. The first one was from a design firm that was fairly middle-sized independent design firm, well-known. They offered me a job, junior designer, and I looked at the operation and I thought, boy, they're doing what I want to do, and they seem like nice men. And then I got a similar offer from Irving Werbin. Irving was 18 years my senior. He could be very charming. Small design firm, 54th Street, right off 5th Avenue. And I made the decision that I had more opportunity to go with Irving for growth than with the other firm. I think I started at $75 a week, and I would be doing everything from mechanicals to comps, hand comps, delivering things, and meeting the clients. Didn't have any clients of my own, hadn't had a whole lot of opportunity to go and sell. The work we were doing was cosmetics, liquor. We were doing record covers for RCA and librettos. And I did get the responsibility to handle that account. So I did work for RCA, and I did go and make the presentations, and I did the design work. That showed client contact, it showed ability to manage the budgets apparently and whatever, so that was going okay. And then Irving said, a couple of guys are coming in from a toy company, from Hasbro, and he said, I'd like you to sit in and meet these guys. He was already not very gung-ho, because honestly, the toy business did not have the greatest reputation. So in comes Don Levine and Jerry Einhorn, and they are right out of Central Casting. Don Levine, slick, dapper, dressed perfectly, black hair slicked back. Jerry Einhorn's, I think, a Rhode Island kind of guy. And they were coming in like they were little kings, and they were coming in with the Holy Grail and, talking to us about what we could do with G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe is on the move.
Hail, 3, 4, got 1 Joe, get some more. Hail, 3, 4, got 1 Joe, get some more.
The more G.I. Joes you have, the bigger the battle action.
So Irving was less than thrilled, and what was the rest of the opportunity there after G.I. Joe? It's some more toys, right? And so somewhere, right, but for me, I looked at this 12-inch figure, and I saw the level of articulation, and I saw the scale, the authenticity of the clothing, all of the accessories. I thought, this stuff is so real that rather than doing crappy illustrations or crappy photography, which they had kind of been doing, and the branding they had been doing was helter-skelter. So I said, I was actually excited. I wasn't faking it. And, did I care about what the opportunities were beyond G.I. Joe? No. So I convinced these guys to give us a chance to do some design work, some comps, and have no clue what the budget was, whether we had a budget. We may not have had a budget, because I don't think I did much on regular hours. And I went out and got a fish tank. I got a fish tank, and I filled the fish tank, and I put the diver in there and whatever with it, and I lit it with crude stuff that I had from my days in the military, and set it up in the studio after hours and photographed it. And then I had the astronaut suspended by fish line from a ceiling, and I punched holes in the black background to make light come for stars, and I took the photos and did comps, did graphics, and knocked them out. We managed to get that assignment then for the first, for a toy fair of 1970, I guess, toy fair of 1970. So now we had mobilized our office a little bit to bring in a couple of staff people, and found an army of freelancers. For very valid reasons, we couldn't do photography because they would never have all the products that were presentable. You know, the two things, or the few things that I had turned out to be flukes, but when they were coming out with new products, given all of the time crunch, there would be no way that we would get that kind of quality as prototypes. So then I just reimagined the whole thing as illustrations, and did a huge search and hired different artists to do comps for different styles. Got the relationship going with Don Stivers and Joe Mandola's office. I would do the sketches and concept of what each product could look like and how it would relate to other products, and there was no competition, so it was really a matter of maxing out what you had and imagining the future for it, and trying to breathe some excitement into it. And I brought back into it my experience from the military, my experience playing as a kid, and my visualization.
Introducing the new G.I. Joe Adventure Team. 5 rugged men with light-like hair. They're outfitted for action, and they take their orders from this man, the Adventure Team Commander.
I've got a tough assignment for you.
The G.I. Joe Adventure Team. They'll dare anything and risk everything. Collect the new G.I. Joe Adventure Team and add to the action with Adventure Team sets. G.I. Joe, now with light-like hair from Hasbro.
They met you in '69, you pitched Toy Fair 1970. What was the mood, what was the changing demographics of the brand?
We had a franchise, G.I. Joe, which had been successful, but he was a killer. The thrust was from the advertising agency to bring this figure back and make him go around the world as an adventurer and get into all of these great situations without shooting at anybody. And the world is ripe for adventure, and this figure is still plenty puzzleable, and we can still deal with all the issues that come with doing a line of products this big, like this dude here. So we had the opportunity to get a fresh look, and he became an adventurer.
Being an Army guy, was there any disappointment on your behalf that it was migrating away from the military roots?
No, the notion of him not being, the theme not being, military, was not a problem, because I was still enraptured with the scale and meticulous detail. These are things that I never had when I was a kid. Just simple as that. I could let myself go and start posing these things and almost playing myself. I could see why kids were, really captivated by it.
From all over the neighborhood, Adventure Team members and equipment arrived for the opening of G.I. Joe headquarters. Flash, a radio message from the tower. Adventure team member caught in quicksand. Get the maps. Here's the location. Get going, Joe, and good luck. Back in the tower, Joe signals, help on the way. We'll help get there in time. Create your own adventures. G.I. Joe Adventure Team Headquarters. G.I. Joes and ATVs sold separately.
So there came Toy Fair 1970. Back in those days, it was cutthroat. It was make or break. I would go down to Toy Fair with the comps and go into that environment as they were setting up for Toy Fair. And it was chaos. Chaos. Hasbro knocked themselves, all the toy companies, knocked themselves out in every way you could imagine for Toy Fair. Everything had to be visual and everything had to be done by hand. All the comps, hand mock-ups, paste type on photos, painting right on the photos sometimes, and hand lettering and folding them up, and not having enough product on time, not having the copy on time, last minute changes in product, additions, deletions, you name it. So it was really about organization and perseverance, dedication. Stephen appreciated, he actually understood the effort and he understood the commitment that went into this. And God knows what their experience was before me. I don't know. I never did learn, but maybe they had some total disasters, right? But they didn't get that from me. They got everything as best it could be under the circumstances, and it was a big success. I don't remember during that first year how many times I went to Rhode Island, to Hasbro's office, but I began to meet, the marketing people, the design people, Jerry Pilkington, who was very cordial. I was, on his turf, but he was very cordial. Tom Laveley was the director of the design. I don't remember whether he was there in 1970, but he was the art director there for most of the years that I think I did the 12-inch. But he was great. He was a great guy and very understanding. He knocked himself out to try to get for me everything I needed. And Don Stivers came through, did amazing creative work. For Hasbro, there was no question that we were going to get year two, and then other people there began to see, and other brand managers wanted to hire us to do this product and that line. And at that point, I could see the potential for expansion, and the issue of doing business for the toy industry was beginning to recede a little bit with its stigma when you looked at the dollar signs. And Irving Werbin could also see the respect that I was getting paid by them, by Hasbro. And Stephen Hassenfeld was a big supporter of me. For sure there was blowback, even in the early days, about why are we giving this right from the get-go. I mean, why are we giving these people in New York? We can do this, I mean, they had an art department, right? So he was getting it, but Stephen was close friends with Joe Bacall and Tom Griffin. And there was a whole other level of expertise and expectation and thinking, young guys taking over the business. And so, it was like, charge, let's go. And for Stephen, it was really important because it was his point at making his step within Hasbro, too. He was graduating to senior here. But that just meant that when Toy Fair came the next year, it wasn't only G.I. Joe, it was all this other stuff. And it was a roller coaster. I think Owen Coleman had come in with us then, Owen was my generation, my year, but he had military, but it was the 6-month something or other. So he was way ahead of me time-wise. He was a local product from Manhattan, but Owen wanted to become a partner, and he could see that it would be a lifetime with Irving before he could become a partner. So Owen left and set up his own design firm. And so Irving at that point could see, well, he better do something. So I came up with the notion to keep a ledger. In it are all of the projects that I worked on with Irving when it was Irving Werben Associates. And it showed all of the projects, it showed all of the billing, it showed all of the out-of-pocket, and it showed the profit. And the profit was listed in red. And I brokered a deal with Irving that I would get a percentage of the profit. Well, this began to add up. So that's when the offer for partnership came in. We called the business Werben and Morrill. So I might have been a full partner in Werben and Morrill in 1976 because of all the pressures on production of a figure this size. So what, in the mid-70s, he ceased to exist, and that's when they decided to give it a shot with the line called Super Joe, which was an 8-inch figure. It was a long shot. We were given the assignment to do the graphics, of course, and we did, and I thought some of the illustrations were interesting. It was interesting. The branding was strong, but it didn't make it, and the fact that it was 8 inches was only a partial step better than 12 in terms of the product cost. A lot of factors, but it didn't even, what would it make, a year or two or a couple of years, and then he was gone.
Here comes Super Joe Commander. Just like Stockton. Look, Terron's on the move again.
You can imagine it's a beast from beyond, and nothing can stop it. It's Terron.
Terron, the beast from beyond, comes with Command Laser, new from Hasbro. Super Joe Commander, sold separately.
So that didn't slow us down with Hasbro in terms of the volume. I don't remember ever not expecting to do a toy fair with some line or products and whatever. And of course, I was by that time full partner and going on doing all kinds of other things. And we were never soliciting more work from Hasbro. Always whatever it was that came. And one of the interesting things in dealing with Stephen Hassenfeld, there was never a contract. It was strictly a commitment. He would say, we want you to commit that you're going to do this work and you're not going to work for other toy companies. Number one, I really didn't want to work for other toy companies because I was doing that much toy business, and even still with Werben and Morrill, that was enough volume with the toy business. We did get approached by other toy companies. Ideal Toy was right here in my neighborhood back in those days. And they called on more than one occasion with something they thought was super duper whooper. And it was like, no. And I think that Stephen truly understood that, that level of trust was there. Never a contract changed hands in all that time.
20 years.
Yeah.
What was it like when they told you after 3 or 4 years that they were going to bring G.I. Joe back?
Yeah. So whatever product lines we'd been working on, the work was going well. We, as far as I remember, billing was still pretty good and the relationship was good. They had changed design managers in-house. Tom Lavely, I don't know whether he retired. Then came Matt Lysak, who became their design manager. And Matt and I got along, really well. Honestly, when they first came in, with the 3 3/4 inch figure. I wasn't so sure. For me, it was a bit of a letdown initially, based on what I had been used to. But, you know, hey, it's a challenge.
He'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there.
It's here, the G.I. Joe collection. Infantry trooper. Codename Grunt. Bazooka soldier. Codename Zap. Motor soldier. Codename Short Fuse. Laser rifle trooper. Codename Flash. Ranger. Codename Stalker. Communications officer. Codename Breaker. Machine gunner. Codename Rock and Roll. Counterintelligence. Codename Scarlet. Commando. Codename Snake Eyes. Each sold separately. G.I. Joe from Hasbro.
The elements were in place with this, again, very posable figure. The copy was great. You know, the characters were interesting. Now they could do many more characters each year than they could have before with the scale and so forth. You could tell there was a lot of effort put in, and it was a big, big deal at Hasbro. It was a big risk to try to bring this back because it was, you know, you only get, I'm sure, one shot at bringing this back, and I'm sure the buyers had to be, a whole world of people had to get brought back into this. There's so many elements of it, but just dealing with our end of it, we were free to do the branding in a fresh way. It wasn't totally fresh. There were still characteristics of the logo that were picked up. The italic, I think we'd gone maybe italic with the logo in an earlier version, and so gave you the action, the movement. We put the star in there instead of the head and all of that. And so it was really, you know, real American red, white, and blue. We had a strong logo, block logo. So we had our system, and now we were looking at the rest of the branding. And I don't know how many other background colors we looked at, because we had done an orange back in the day. We had done varying backgrounds back in the day. We knew what the category looked like, and it just seemed black. It made good sense because it made that logo pop that was neutral. When you're dealing with a red, white, and blue logo, you are so much better off on a neutral background. So the face panel illustration is black, for instance, on a vehicle. But in the back, we would photograph the vehicle, but it would be a red base, but a transition from black at the top down. So there was a richness, a masculinity to the whole thing with the black holding it all together. And I don't think anybody else in the market was dealing with a black background. So now how does the figure, the illustration, is he going to be in an environment? No, too complicated. There's no way you're going to have 15 characters in year one, and by the time, you know, year 4 comes around, if you're thinking ahead, which you got to think ahead, you're going to have all these figures with all these different backgrounds, all these action things. No. Now, if you just do the figure and you silhouette him and you put him against black, that's not so great either. It looks cut out. When we were looking for illustrators, we're still with Joe Mandola. Don Stivers actually gave up doing commercial illustration altogether. His interests then were Western, and he was doing fine art paintings, realistic paintings, and he became a recognized Western artist. But we looked at other illustrators, and we saw Hector Garrido, and Hector was doing book covers. One thing we know about book covers, back then, maybe now too, they don't pay a hell of a lot, but they're very demanding. In other words, there's a lot of good artwork, a lot of time spent on doing illustrations for book covers, and I'm sure the artist isn't getting paid a whole lot and probably has time pressures. So we saw that Hector was doing all these book covers, and they were very exciting. They were mostly romance, masculine men holding beautiful women in their arms, with a house with one light dimly lit in the background with a dark background. It's a formula, and you could find 500 of them, but the illustration is great. So we saw somewhere in something that Hector had done where he had an explosion in the background. It wasn't behind the figure exactly, but it was somewhere back there. I think that may have been what sparked it.
Can I show you something really quick?
Okay, there you go.
This was his covers for the Baroness series.
Now, I don't know whether these are what I saw.
Can't confirm if that was it or not, but it's a possibility.
It's definitely a possibility.
She was a all clad in black kind of espionage lady,
Right.
and those were from the mid-70s.
I would say that very likely where that came from, but a graphic explosion. It's not an illustration of an explosion. It's a graphic interpretation of an explosion. And the reason that the explosion works well is manifold. It's flexible in its design to fit the package. It obviously pops the figure. It adds an incredible action-oriented atmosphere. It ties the line together against the black background, stars and stripes. And thanks to somebody like Hector Garrido, it gave Hector the opportunity to cast back reflections, if you will, from this burst anywhere he needed it on the figure. So if you had a figure with a black outfit on, and his black arm was coming over his black body, and his weapon was black, if you did a realistic illustration without that explosion, you'd be hard-pressed to make that exciting. But because of the explosion, you could cast reflections anywhere you needed it, and it wouldn't look contrived. It just worked. It worked great. You get into doing vehicles, you just make the explosion fit, and especially on vehicles, I found the ability to cast back in reflections on parts of the vehicle to define gears and other armaments and things was extremely useful. So Hector did terrific. We were right because his ability to turn out work rapidly was mind-boggling. The workflow was we get presented with whatever they had. Sometimes it would just come in sketches, no product at all. You had what the designer of the product was thinking, and then with the bio, you knew where they wanted to go with who this character was. So now you were faced with this influx of characters, and you had to analyze each one and look at how he or she differed from other characters in the line, so each one was unique in terms of as much as it could be in terms of its pose. You had to look at what the accessories were. Now they were shown in the blister card. That was good in that the kid could see what he was actually getting, but you still wanted, when you do the illustration, to try to show all of the components as best you could in an action pose, which is a real challenge to make each one different as you can, little tight confines. You know, packaging is not exactly the most creative of endeavors. There are so many constraints when you're doing a package. Protect the product, show the product best you can in a little space. Put all the stuff on there, all the logos on there, all the mandatory on there, all of the crap that marketing sparks want to add at the last minute. Stick this here, this price off, this thing. Do all this within these confines and have this work. That's why a lot of good designers don't want to be in packaging. You know, you'd have to make compromises and you'd have to embellish. But you could cheat like hell with what you were illustrating because the kid could see the product. So even on a vehicle, on the back panel of the package, you were showing a photograph. So you couldn't be accused of cheating. So you had a lot of freedom. So this stuff would come in, and I would, especially in the early years and even in the Real American Hero, I would be the one that would just do sketches for each figure posing. And when I say sketches, the thing about that is They're actually life-size thumbnails, if you will, to try to figure out for myself first what could be done, different options, and how it related to everything else. In a way, it was to relieve Hector of any burden of having to be a designer. He was an illustrator, I was a designer. I was never trying to be an illustrator. In fact, when you do the thumbnails, the point is not to try to lock the illustrator into something. The illustrator is the illustrator. He's a hell of a lot better at what he's doing than you're going to be. I'm the designer. I know how it should work. I want the illustrator to breathe life into this thing, but when he's done, it fits. It fits. And you can see endless examples of packaging being done where the illustrator does his thing and it's compromised hugely when it gets put on the package because the end of a rifle gets covered by a blister pack. I would collect whatever reference came and try to figure this out as quick as I could. And if they said there were going to be 12 new figures and 6 of them came in at one time, and I'd have to do the best I could with 6, not even knowing what the others were going to be, and compare it to the year before, then I would call Joe Mandola, and they would send over somebody who would physically pick up this stuff from the office. I would quickly go over what the intentions were. I'd make some notes maybe. They would pick it up and physically get on a train at the end of the day and go up to Connecticut and deliver it to Hector. So what would it take? 3 days? 3 days, probably a piece, if we were under pressure. These would start coming back one at a time. Same with the vehicles. 4 days, maybe. Amazing, amazing. And then we would, mock them up. We would do whatever, eventually make color photos and paste them up for comps and so forth. I wouldn't have to talk to Hector personally. Now, Hector was a shy fellow, and I learned that he was going to come through. I don't remember him ever not coming through. I don't remember ever sending it back and saying, this doesn't work. No.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
So there we were in the early 80s and through the mid 80s with the explosion and the G.I. Joe branding, the logo, and the marketing people began to think they needed a refresh, maybe to make it a little bit more contemporary, keeping the equity, obviously, which was very successful. We had done 3-dimensional G.I. Joe logos in the past, and I looked at packaging in the supermarket over the years, and I would see examples of things like Ritz crackers where the logo was just flat. And now I'm happy to say, when you look at logos now, often even something like Ritz crackers, you'd see shading, dimension, bringing into the logos some life. And so we wanted to do that with the G.I. Joe logo. So we gave it a 3-dimensional feeling, which is more interesting graphically. It shows maybe more modeling like you get in the figure. And then the burst, we wanted to do something different from the explosion. And we explored a whole lot of different things. And then we came up with the linear background, which, at that point, digital imaging, all that stuff was, I think, becoming a factor, and there was something about the linear thing which sort of was more current. And obviously, we're just able to incorporate the same color scheme. So it gave the illustrator all the same options. It gave us the flexibility of designing that background linear pattern to fit as needed. So it was definitely an upgrade. And I would say at this point, If I had to choose as the creator between them, I would say the three-dimensional one would be my go-to. I think the linear pattern works very well. It's not as exciting as where we started with the explosion, but I think the buyers were still on board. In packaging, you always have the pressure of wanting to do something better, something different, something fresher, or something current. And what is that? The designer of the packaging, the branding, has to try to understand what's really needed and not letting it get out of control. Because when you start having too many elements, or the marketing people starting to put their price offs on there, you run the risk of cheapening the thing. So it's not like a cereal package where you can throw on a special offer. You know, when you try to do that, you're really, it's a tough one.
Now back to G.I. Joe.
When the day came that I bought out Irving, yeah, I had the business and I had every single problem that went with it. Running the business, finding a new place for the office, because we were not going to be able to renew the lease. That was out of the question. The agency was taking the space back. So my old friend Owen Coleman had been in touch, and he'd been a competitor. Basically, out of the blue, comes a call from Owen asking me if I would like to meet with Owen and Sal LaPuma and Abe Siegel. For me, it was a godsend because they had space. And I was really, I mean, I could have made a fortune if I stayed by, and I would have been dead in 2 years at that rate. But as Owen says in his book, the chapter about me joining Coleman, LaPuma, and Siegel, does it say what a great designer I am? No. Does it say what a great business manager I am? No. Does it say what a great person I am? No. It says Edward was able to come in with $1 million in billing for just the Hasbro account. That's a couple bucks during that time. And it was steady work.
I've come to wipe your windows. $5.75 an hour. I start on west corner, top floor first.
So, as time went by, I've been involved with this for literally decades. On the Hasbro's end, you got a lot of new people coming in. You got 23-year-old brand managers who were coming in, and I had been designing this thing practically as long as they're alive. And you got all of the issues of the internal design department saying, is he still around? So that pressure's been going on a long time. Stephen is no longer with us. It started to become an issue of, do you need to charge that much? You get all the natural, it's unnatural that it lasted as long as it did, right? Really unnatural. So the pressure became, let's get other people working on this and let's do some design in-house. And you can see the period of time where all of that became obvious in the graphics. Not saying that each individual package might not be good if it were standalone, but they aren't. And as much as I appreciate the talent of the illustration going forward, I'm not appreciative of the graphics, because I think in the world of design in Manhattan, they became ungepatchket, which is an expression, for those who don't know, of something that's got too many elements and is all bungled up. Toy packaging, G.I. Joe packaging is extremely labor intensive. And no matter what they thought about how much we were charging, for sure we were not charging on an hourly basis anywhere near what we were charging our other clients. The so-called stigma, if you will, of working for a toy company never ever really went away. Certain things, like when we did Transformers, that was on a different plane. I was so excited about Visionaries, and we were like the first to bring a hologram into the package. And it was fun. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't fun, but the billing was stagnant in terms of increasing. So my partners were really always on me because we just used so much resources in-house. And they really wanted me to not be spending that proportion of time with that one client. And there were many opportunities we had where I would be the right person in our partnership to do the other work, whatever that would be, whether it be cereal packaging or 3M products or Castrol motor oil, I don't know, whatever it was, the billing was much better. So we just finally reached a point where this all came to be. And at one point it was just a obvious end of the relationship, and there were no yelling and screaming or hard feelings or anything. It was a natural happening, and we at one point just said sorry. I think they were forcing us to say sorry, but we came to the conclusion we had to say sorry, this has been great, and we're moving on.
No rubble, no untidy after effects. Nothing remains but memories.
My early desire was to do graphics that stood the test of time. And there's graphics that we did back then that have stood the test of time. There's a logotype for the Daily News, that masthead with the camera, which I designed it and drew it. But who knew that something back in the day, something like a G.I. Joe, would wind up being such a keepsake and make such an impact and be talked about, 40 years later. I was absolutely amazed when I started looking closely at these illustrations from Hector, how really great they were. My favorite is Recondo. It sort of encapsulates everything, action, expression, burst. But all the collectors had their favorites, and I had illustrations, the original art. And it turns out that's pretty unique because so many of the original illustrations apparently perished in floods and other natural calamities in Rhode Island. When I decided to sell some of them, it was because I realized that there were people out there. Obviously there was a monetary thing, but I was so surprised to find grown men who were so passionate about these products. In doing so, I met many other people, and I met Carson, and that became a friendship, and I'm just thrilled to be able to share everything that I can about those with somebody who was the epitome of passionate about G.I. Joe and cataloging this stuff and creating things like this for history, I think is just incredible. But who could have imagined for it to be, that meaningful is really a hoot.